New Year's Eve in Baltimore was supposed to be all fireworks, laughter, and crowded streets buzzing with people celebrating the start of a fresh year. The air was thick with excitement, music blaring from nearby bars, and the smell of street food mixing with the chilly winter air. But all that joy turned into pure terror in a blink. From somewhere high above the city, a sniper started picking people off one by one. Nobody knew where the shots were coming from. People screamed, ran in every direction, and the streets turned into chaos almost instantly. It was like the city had suddenly become a hunting ground, and the predator was invisible. That night, fear itself walked through Baltimore like a ghost. Meanwhile, Officer Eleanor Falco was just trying to handle her own small chaos. She was dealing with a messy situation at a cafe, trying to calm down a belligerent drunk who was giving the owner trouble. Eleanor had been trained to keep a cool head, but before she could even sort things out, her radio crackled to life with an urgent call. Every unit in the city was needed immediately. There was a mass shooting happening at a plaza nearby. Without wasting a second, Eleanor left the cafe behind and raced to the scene. When she arrived, the horror hit her like a physical blow. The sniper had already killed 29 people, random victims, young and old, men and women. The bloodshed was methodical, precise, and utterly terrifying. Investigators quickly traced the source of the bullets to an apartment on the 17th floor of a nearby building. Officers were preparing to move in, but before anyone could act, the building exploded. Flames shot into the sky, debris rained down, and panic swept through the streets as residents scrambled for their lives. Eleanor grabbed her phone and started recording video evidence, fearing the sniper might try to escape amid the chaos. Smoke filled the air, thick and choking, making it nearly impossible to breathe. Eleanor felt herself getting dizzy, almost collapsing, until Detective Mackenzie handed her an oxygen mask, steadying her enough to keep going. Not long after, FBI lead investigator Jeffrey Landmark arrived on the scene. His team began combing through the evidence and quickly determined that the apartment belonged to a Norwegian man living in Oslo. He had received it years ago as payment for a debt and had been trying to sell it ever since. Back at police headquarters, Landmark gathered the team to discuss the situation. He suggested shutting down all highways to prevent the shooter from escaping the city. But Deputy Governor Capleton immediately shot down the idea, worried about causing panic and ruining the governor's public image. Later, Eleanor and her colleagues sat together, trying to make sense of why the killer was doing this. Landmark, impressed by her sharp observations, asked Eleanor what she thought. She explained that this wasn't just random violence. It was driven by a personal, almost obsessive urge. That's why the killer kept going instead of stopping after the first few victims. When asked why the attacks had paused, she theorized that the sniper's compulsion had been temporarily satisfied, but warned that it was only a matter of time before he struck again. Landmark was struck by the clarity and depth of her analysis. The next morning, Eleanor's boss called her, telling her that Landmark wanted to meet immediately. She went to a cafe to find him already in a heated discussion with Capleton, who was stubbornly refusing to take any precautionary action. After the deputy governor stormed out, Eleanor sat down with Landmark, who told her he wanted her on the FBI team. Eleanor was stunned. Landmark explained that it wasn't just her intelligence that interested him. It was the way her mind worked, chaotic yet insightful, not unlike the killer's own thinking. Detective Mackenzie soon joined them, and Landmark said the three of them would form a task force to track the sniper. Their first stop was the morgue, where the 29 victims were laid out. Eleanor, Landmark, and Mackenzie examined them closely. The sniper's accuracy was unnerving, every shot precise, deliberate, and deadly. It was clear that whoever did this had professional training, most likely military. Landmark also noted that the victims were a mix of ages, races, and genders, proving there was no particular pattern to the selection. While they were there, an officer arrived with news of a new suspect. SWAT had surrounded a building, and the FBI team rushed over. FBI agent Frank briefed them. The suspect was a teenage boy living directly above the apartment that had exploded. When questioned, the boy barricaded himself inside and threatened to kill anyone who tried to enter. Frank was convinced the boy fit the profile. He had ADHD, was bullied at school, spent hours watching extremist videos, obsessed over violent video games, and had even been to a shooting range with his uncle. But Landmark wasn't so sure. Eleanor raised a critical point. A mattress had been found in the destroyed apartment, which didn't make sense if the boy lived upstairs. Frank dismissed her concerns and ordered SWAT to act. The team stormed the apartment. Panicked, the teenager jumped from the window and fell to his death. When authorities checked the body, they found no weapons, proving he wasn't the shooter. Frustrated but determined, Landmark decided to look into a group of painters who had worked in the apartment 2 years earlier. Rodney, Haynes, and Dimitri were brought in for questioning. Landmark asked about their whereabouts on New Year's Eve. Each had an alibi, but tension was thick in the room. Rodney stayed calm, while Haynes and Dimitri grew defensive, insisting it was ridiculous to accuse them of a crime linked to a job from years ago. Days later, another incident shook the city. Inside a busy mall, an elderly man was trying on clothes when someone slipped into the changing room and stole his belongings. A little later, a stranger was spotted in the restroom washing himself with the stolen clothes. Another shopper noticed him and reported it to security. Guards rushed in, but the thief had already moved on, only to be caught moments later in the cafeteria, trying to grab leftover food. When security demanded to check his bag, the man refused and suddenly pulled out a gun, opening fire on everyone nearby. Eleanor, at that moment, was at a gun shop questioning the owner about weapons similar to those used in the earlier attacks. Her call ended abruptly with news of the mall shooting. She raced to the scene, horror-struck at the mix of civilian and police casualties. In the security room, she and Landmark, along with Mackenzie, studied the CCTV footage. The shooter was tall, thin, and wore a hoodie hiding his face. They traced his original clothes before he went into the restroom and decided to collect them for DNA analysis. Watching the footage, Eleanor noticed something interesting. The man seemed more interested in finding food, clothes, and cleaning himself than in killing at first. He ate only vegetables, hinting he was a vegetarian. Landmark pointed out that the precision of his later attacks suggested serious sharpshooter training, likely from an upbringing around skilled marksmen. The footage even showed him planting grenades in trash bins, killing multiple officers in a single blast. When the police searched the restroom afterward, the stolen clothes were gone, hauled away in the trash. Holding on to this lead, Eleanor and Mackenzie went to the city dump to sift through piles of garbage. Meanwhile, Landmark faced pressure from superiors and from Capleton, who seemed more focused on politics than justice. Eventually, Eleanor and Mackenzie found the shooter's discarded clothes, giving the team an important lead. Soon after, news outlets broadcast footage of the mall attack, asking viewers to call in with tips. Eleanor kept digging into the three painters. Reviewing Rodney's bank records revealed he was juggling multiple jobs, raising suspicions. At the same time, lab results showed the shooter's shirt contained fragile hair, typically found in people who had experienced serious head trauma. Television phones lit up with live calls from viewers. One taunting caller admitted pride in the sniper's actions and claimed to belong to a group called the Invisible Army, claiming to fight a corrupt system. When pressed, the man threatened the news anchor and even mentioned targeting his daughter in college. FBI agents traced the call, sending SWAT to intercept him. They found he was active in a gun rights group, openly hostile toward the government, liberals, and Jews. Investigators tracked his car and followed his movements. Still, Landmark and Eleanor suspected the real sniper was a lone wolf, unconnected to any group or ideology. Despite their doubts, they were ordered to continue the operation. Eventually, the caller and his associates pulled their truck into a store, boasting about scaring the news anchor and the police. Eleanor and Mackenzie went undercover, quietly warning civilians to evacuate. Tension mounted when an elderly man asked Eleanor to repeat herself, drawing attention from one of the suspects. The man became suspicious, watching her closely. At that moment, additional officers stormed in, weapons drawn. A fierce shootout broke out, leaving most of the armed men dead. Baltimore's streets, once alive with New Year's cheer, had been transformed into a battlefield. The chaos finally settled, at least on the surface. One terrified survivor had grabbed a weapon, desperate to defend themselves, but the moment they tried to use it, officers subdued them with a stun gun. Everyone thought the nightmare had reached a temporary calm, but the real twist came when the supposed mastermind was finally taken into custody. Sitting handcuffed and cornered, the man shocked everyone by confessing that it had all been a stunt, a cruel, elaborate joke. There was no invisible army, no secret faction plotting these horrific attacks, just an individual seeking attention, leaving a trail of terror behind him. The next morning, Landmark found himself in front of a disciplinary committee, a panel of stiff-faced officials ready to blame someone for the failures of the operation. They accused him of being incompetent, claiming his choices had directly caused unnecessary deaths. Landmark tried to explain that many of the decisions he made weren't optional. They had been forced on him by circumstances and higher-ups. But the committee wasn't interested in excuses. To them, as the man in charge, he was accountable, and that was that. They also seized on his decision to bring Eleanor onto the team, digging into her past and highlighting the fact that she had previously been rejected by the FBI and had struggled with addiction. Landmark defended her vigorously, insisting she was brilliant and uniquely capable, but the officials weren't listening. They weren't looking for explanations. They wanted a scapegoat. The meeting ended with a harsh blow to both Landmark and Eleanor. They were removed from the investigation entirely. For Eleanor, the weight of everything, the shootings, the deaths, the pressure from superiors, crashed down on her like a tidal wave. She went home, exhausted, and broke down completely, the stress and trauma overwhelming her. But later that night, after hours of sitting in darkness and processing the events, she found a thread of focus again. She couldn't just sit and do nothing. She had a lead, and it was time to act. Eleanor immediately went to confront Rodney. She began questioning him about the multiple jobs he held over the years, suggesting that he may have subcontracted some of his work to others, people who might now be dangerous. At first, Rodney denied everything, sticking to a careful, defensive story. But when his wife snapped at him, demanding the truth, the walls crumbled. Rodney confessed. He admitted that he often hired immigrants, ex-convicts, and men who struggled to find stable employment. He paid them poorly, but made a point of bringing them lunch every day. Among these workers was a man named Dean. Dean, Eleanor learned, was vegan, not by choice but because of past trauma. He had once worked in a slaughterhouse, and the things he witnessed there had forced him to give up meat and dairy entirely. Rodney admitted, reluctantly, that Dean's height and build matched the sniper from the mall attack. Eleanor didn't waste a second. She called Landmark, who hurried over to join her. Together, they brought in a sketch artist and, using Rodney's description, produced a detailed portrait of Dean. Since the city had only 3 slaughterhouses, the team knew exactly where to start. At the first 2 locations, nobody recognized the sketch. But at the third, an elderly woman immediately identified Dean Posse. She described him as quiet, hardworking, and generally well-behaved. But deeper investigations revealed a darker past. A supervisor named Alonso had tormented Dean during his time there, mocking him relentlessly and humiliating him over the shape of his head. One day, Alonso suffered a gruesome accident in the hamburger section, falling into a meat grinder. Dean claimed it was an accident, but most believed it had been intentional. Dean had been convicted but served only 2 years before parole, backed by letters from his father's military friends. As Eleanor dug through Dean's files, she uncovered more troubling details. His father had been a soldier and a shooting instructor. Dean had been shot in the head as a child, an injury that left permanent brain trauma. He had no credit cards, no home address, and no social security number, effectively erasing him from official records. He was a ghost in society. Later, Eleanor and Landmark tracked him to his mother's house. Eleanor suggested calling Mackenzie for backup, but Landmark refused. Involving the full FBI could ruin any chance of a quiet capture. When Mrs. Posse returned home, she was aware of her son's actions but refused to cooperate at first, fearing for his life. Landmark reassured her. They only wanted to capture Dean alive. Hesitant but convinced, she let them inside. She recounted her memories of Dean as a happy, intelligent child, until the tragic accident at age 6 when his father's gun went off and shot him in the head. That incident changed him forever. He became withdrawn, angry, and resentful of the world. Though his father trained him for military service, Dean was rejected, deemed not strong enough. As Eleanor listened, her eyes roamed the property. She noticed 2 teacups on a small table outside, a shirt hanging on a line to dry, and a shed a little way off. She tried to warn Landmark, but before she could act, a shot rang out. Dean had fired from the shed, hitting Landmark instantly. He fell to the ground, lifeless. Mrs. Posse screamed at Eleanor not to move, threatening that she would be next if she disobeyed. She reminded Eleanor of her promise to keep Dean alive and demanded to know how she planned to fulfill it. Shaken but determined, Eleanor handed Mrs. Posse her phone and gun, begging her to convince Dean to surrender. Mrs. Posse stepped outside and called out to her son, pleading with him to stop the violence. She reminded him that Eleanor could help, and that his medical history might protect him from prison. Dean stayed silent. Overwhelmed by frustration, his mother tragically took her own life in front of him. The impact of her death forced Dean to step out of the shed, weapon in hand, and move toward the house. He explained to Eleanor that his rage wasn't personal, it was aimed at society as a whole. Eleanor remained calm, telling him she understood that feeling, having once felt the same anger herself. Their tense dialogue stretched for what felt like hours. Eventually, Dean began to trust her just enough to speak. He confessed he wanted to lie beside his mother and asked Eleanor to shoot him once he fell asleep. He pleaded for her to burn his body afterward so it would never appear on the news. Eleanor reluctantly agreed, but before anything else could happen, flashing lights of a police car outside startled Dean. Convinced that Eleanor had betrayed him, he struck her with his rifle and dragged her into the basement, tying her up. A short time later, an officer outside ordered Mrs. Posse to open the door. Dean fired on her immediately. When another officer called for backup, Dean was shot and killed in the crossfire. In minutes, the house was surrounded by even more police. Eleanor pleaded with Dean to stop the violence, promising she would help him escape alive if he would untie her. But before the situation could be resolved, a bomb exploded outside, throwing everything into chaos. Seizing the moment, Eleanor lunged forward and bit Dean's neck. Blood poured as he stumbled outside, disoriented. Eleanor freed herself from the basement and crawled to safety, finding Mackenzie nearby. She relayed that Dean was wounded but still alive. Meanwhile, Dean fled across an open field behind the house. Police cars swarmed the area until they spotted him lying in the grass, bleeding heavily from his neck. As he lifted his rifle for what would be the last time, officers opened fire, ending the deadly standoff. After the ordeal, Eleanor met with her superiors in Capleton. They wanted to classify the entire operation to ensure the FBI and the governor received all the credit. They offered Eleanor a position as an FBI intelligence analyst to keep her silent. She refused. Instead, she demanded that Landmark be honored posthumously with the Medal of Valor and that his pension be given to his partner. She also insisted on serving as a special agent rather than being sidelined in office. After some negotiation, the officials agreed. The story ends with the city leadership heading to a press conference, while Eleanor walks home alone, haunted by Landmark's death and the bloodshed she had witnessed. The moral, as grim and ironic as it may sound, is clear. Never underestimate a hooded figure with a grudge, and never trust a hungry man in a hoodie. And that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more content, and ring the bell so you never miss an update. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.